Welcome to track 57 of the 4x4 Earth podcast, the LandCruiser 300 series and the Ineos Grenadier new car reviews.
Join James from 4x4earth.com as he learns all there is to know about four-wheel driving, camping, fishing and getting out and exploring our great country on the 4x4 Earth podcast.
Hey team, super excited to be doing our next series of the 4x4 Earth podcast. It's only been a year since the last episode. Who would have thunk it? But there's been a little thing called COVID which has gotten in the way. However, we're all vaccinated now. We are good to go. We're great to get out on the tracks. And so we're going to kick off with a couple of really interesting episodes with Robert Pepper. This one we're going to be looking at the new LandCruiser 300 series. This is going to be a very popular vehicle. I think we're going to see lots of them out and about. And we're also going to look at the Ineos Grenadier. This is a vehicle I am super excited about. It's something that I would actually think about getting for myself. Very keen to see what the final design specs look like on it. So without any further ado, let's get into it with Robert. Robert, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, James. Always a pleasure to be here.
So quite a lot's been happening as we slowly come out of lockdown. Well, particularly for us in Victoria. The exciting thing is there's a few new vehicles that are going to be coming out to play. So, and you've been lucky enough to go out and test drive a couple of them.
Yeah, well, test drive and test ride one. So the first one's the LandCruiser 300. So I was the second or third non-Toyota employee in the world to drive a 300 series back in May, and we had to have this embargo where we're not allowed to say anything about it for months, and it was only listed in July. I don't really know why it was that long, but it was. So yeah, I've had the pleasure of driving a 300 series, and I've also ridden in, but not driven, the Ineos Grenadier.
So to the LC300, obviously there's a lot of interest in that, and I think as probably the most exciting, the Ineos Grenadier, I think there's a lot of people who are watching this to see how it goes. So we'll start off with the LC300. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's basically a 200 series, but better. So if you like the 200 series and everything it did and is, then you'll generally like the 300 series. There's probably two disadvantages for it. One is the split tailgate is gone. It's now a single-piece lift-up, and that has been an unpopular move. There's reasons behind that, and the second is the smaller fuel tank. It's now 110, not 138 litres. But those two things aside, it's better than the 200 in every other way that you can reasonably think of. Probably a criticism you could level at Toyota is that it's not vastly better than what you might expect given sort of a 14-year gap to models there. And a particular thing I would say that I would have liked Toyota to have done better on would have been the payload. And as you know, everyone knows, the 200 series is quite payload limited, 610 kilograms or thereabouts for the GXL model. And that's really not enough for a full drive of that size. That really needs to be up to 900 mark. And there's been a small improvement in payload for the 300, but it's in the order of 50 to 90 kilograms. It's really, really not great.
What does it ride like?
It rides too softly, in my view. I think Toyota's standard suspension is a little bit too soft out of the box for full driving, which is why the aftermarket stuff is so popular. And when I drove the 300, it had a bar and winch on it, and I noticed a distinct amount of porpoising or pitching as the vehicle went over rough ground, and it was distinctly. So what happened is there's a fairly high-speed corner, and we were told there was a maximum speed we could take it at, and I took it at that maximum speed, plus perhaps a little bit of GST. And the car porpoised a bit, and as a result, it sort of worked itself to the outside of the bend because of that porpoising, whereas the 200 series, which we were driving back-to-back, didn't so much. So I think the suspension's a little bit soft to begin with. And when you put a bar and winch on it, obviously you've got a fairly significant weight a long way in front of the front axle, and that just is problematic. And that was also true of the 200 series. I drove the 200 series in Cape York, which had a bar and winch package, stock suspension, and it was awful, absolutely awful. The car had too much power for the chassis. So, yeah, the suspension far be it from me to tell Toyota engineers what to do, but that's exactly what I'm doing. It just needs to be stiffer. But the aftermarket will fix that.
What about off-road? How did you find you drove it off-road?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, look, it's better than the 200 series in two ways. One is that it is more capable, the electronics better, so it's got a more effective brake traction control. And, for example, it's got more suspension flex, although a lot of suspension flex is not necessarily a good thing. The angles are pretty much the same. This wheelbase is the same. The tyre diameter is the same. The tyres are narrower, by the way. It's a fallacy that the tyres are smaller diameter. They're not. They're narrower, but same diameter. And the tyre width won't make any difference to contact patch or grip. Anyway, coming back to that, it's better because the electronic calibration is better, suspension design is better, but also it's more usable. So with the 200 series in this lowest crawl control speed, it was unusable. You would just bounce around. It was awful. And it's much smoother. It's actually possible to use the damn thing in the lower crawl control mode, as an example. And it's also easier to use. So now you can actually use the turn assist feature without needing to unlock the centre diff and press 1,000 buttons. It's just generally easier to use. And obviously you've now got a 10-speed gearbox, and that means that the engine can be more, you've got more control over the torque output, when and how, etc. And the gearbox is better as well. It's smarter shifting, and when you select a gear, it stays there. There's none of this 200 series where you had the selector in 3 and it would use gears 1 to 3, etc. So it's better than the 200 series off-road, no question. But it's not. I mean, the 200 series was so good. You're not going to get in a 300 series and go, oh my God, it's 1,000 times better. It's not. It's just a little bit better all the way across every terrain. And it's lighter. That helps as well.
What sort of options are there?
Just the one, and this has been a subject of much debate. So there's a V6 turbo diesel, 3.3 litres. It produces more power and torque than the V8 of old, and it is a controversial, well, to some people, hot V design. And yeah, I think it's a perfectly fine engine. It's quieter, refined, and more powerful. And because it's connected to a 10-speed auto, that means that the engine doesn't need to be as optimised over as wide a rev range as a one connected to a 6-speed automatic. In other words, that the engine will spend more of its time closer to its sweet spot, so you don't need to optimise it over that wide rev range. So there's a whole bunch of changes compared to the V8. The turbochargers on the V8 were twins. You had one for each bank of 4 cylinders, whereas with the V6, they're actually working in concert. You've got one which works all the way through the rev range and another one which works just within a certain area of rev range. And also the angle at which the air is directed onto the vanes changes as well. So the turbochargers are much more sophisticated, and there's been just a whole bunch of efficiency changes in there, and that's why the V6 can be more powerful than the V8. And we're talking 14 years of diesel engine development technology. It should be no surprise that you can get more out of a smaller capacity.
And better fuel efficiency at that.
Yeah, not massively though. Considering that you've got a more modern engine, you've got an extra 4 gear ratios, and the thing is lighter, I think it only came out to about another litre per 100 or something. It's not as much as...
Yeah, half a litre.
Yeah, half a litre. It's really not the sort of leap forwards I would have expected. So I'd have expected at least a litre and a half. But, it is what it is, right? So basically the fuel efficiency gain does not offset the smaller tank size.
It's 8.9 though. For a vehicle that size, that's combined, and of course these are the factory numbers. Be interesting to see what it is real world.
But if you look at what the Europeans are getting out of the Audis and the BMWs and stuff like that, they get a lot better. But then again, they don't have the weight penalty of a live axle and a separate rear chassis. And Toyota specifically designed the 300 series to have both to meet its robustness targets. Now, the likes of Audi and BMW do not design their vehicles for thousands of kilometres of rough road. So for what it is, yes, that's right, but I would still have liked a little bit more than that. But, fuel efficiency for me is not the top thing about a 300 series. Payload is what I'm most disappointed about.
Would it be like towing?
It's good towing. It's better than the 200. The main difference is because we towed a 3-ton trailer with it. The main difference is when you pull away, because it just gets off the line quicker. With the 200, you sort of, the revs pick up and then the turbos come in and then you're moving. With the 300, it's much more seamless, and the revs and the gear change is quicker and smoother. So it's good when you pull away. Now, when you slow down, that's an advantage as well, because you have the gear change, which is very quick to slow down. So it actually helps slow down under engine braking as well, better than the 200 series did. And again, the closer ratio gearbox, 10-speed rather than 6, helps that as well. So once you're actually moving underway, then from a dynamic perspective, there's not a huge difference between the 200 and the 300 series. I mean, look, I'm sure if I did enough testing, I'd probably put the 300 ahead, because there's minor suspension changes, like the rear shocks are more upright, etc., things like that. But it's not going to make a massive difference when you're underway. It's really braking and accelerating, you find out. And also the trailer stability control would be improved as well. We didn't test that, obviously, but you would think that, 14 years, well, you have the latest version of all of that.
What sort of models are there for it?
A lot. There's 6, actually. So you've got the PovPack GX, which comes with 17-inch steel wheels, and that's got the biggest payload because it's got the least gear, all the way through to 2, not 1, but 2 top-line models. So it's got a bit confusing. So the Sahara is no longer the top model. You've got, above the Sahara, you've got the Sahara VX, and you've got the GR Sport, which equal pride of place at the top. Now, both of them are 5 seats, so the most luxurious 7-seater is actually the Sahara. Now, the Sahara ZX is, as you'd expect, just loaded with all of the luxury electro trickery. I've got a blog post on my website which goes through it all, and I can't remember exactly what it is now. The model of interest is the GR Sport, because that is the one which has all of the off-road trickery, such as the cross-axle differential locks and the KDSS suspension and the active variable suspension, etc. So that's the one to go for. Interestingly, you can't fit a bull bar to it. Well, you can fit it, but Toyota don't want you to, because of weight concerns over the front axle, which is kind of ironic, but there you go. And the common question is, can you option things like lockers for a lower spec one? And the answer to that is always going to be no, because the reason the lockers are there is to tempt you into a higher spec vehicle. And it is interesting that Toyota on one hand say, and I've asked them this, and they've said, I said, why did you make lockers for the 300 series when the 200 didn't need them? We go, user feedback. So the follow-up question, which I didn't bother ask or know the answer, is going to be, well, if that was user feedback, why aren't they extended across all the range? And the answer is, you want to try and tempt people into the most expensive model, but they'll never admit that.
And so which ones have got lockers?
Just the GR Sport. Now, and you can't option it either. Now, that will probably change at some point, but look at what happened with the 200 series, right? I mean, KDSS, I don't think was ever standard on the poverty pack. Can't remember if it went as far down as GXL. It might have done by the end of the range there. Toyota tempt you into the higher spec models, and that's where the goodies are. And they've been doing that ever since the 80 series, probably before, I don't know.
Now, what is KDSS?
Oh, God, that's a complicated question for a podcast. I kind of need a whiteboard for that. But in short, it is a trick suspension system. So you have a sway bar. Now, this could be a whole hour-long dissertation on suspension dynamics here. But anyway, you got a sway bar. I'm going to assume people know what a sway bar is. If not, go Google it. And you want your sway bar to be connected for on-road handling to control body roll. But you want it disconnected when you're off-road, because body roll isn't a concern there, but you want maximum flexibility of the suspension to move up and down so that the wheels remain in contact with undulating terrain and therefore maximise traction. So how do you have your cake and eat it? Well, the answer is you have a disconnectable sway bar which connects when you're on-road and disconnects when you're off-road. And you can think of EKDSS, to give it its correct name, as a computer-controlled disconnectable sway bar. But it actually disconnects at high speed as well when you're going in a straight line, and reconnects as and when the computers see fit. So that's, in effect, what it is. Now, I do have a more detailed explanation on my YouTube channel. You can go down, I've got diagrams, and I talk about in action, there's video, etc. So that's your short thing there. Now, the question is, do you actually need it? And the answer to that is, no, you don't need it. Would it be nice? Yes, because you could take a Poverty Pack GX 300 series, which doesn't have it, and you put a suspension lift in it decent tyres, and you can then go anywhere in Australia, basically, pretty much. So it's not required to get you up any given track. It's just nicer if you have it in the car, will do it a bit easier.
So what do you think? Is it value for money? Because some of those models, they're certainly getting up there in price.
Yeah, look, value for money, that's always a sort of beauty in the eye of a beholder question. Look, Toyota's LandCruisers 200s and all the rest have never been sort of a lot of bang for your buck in one way. You don't look at that, wow, that's an amazing bargain. I mean, Toyotas can be. The Toyota 86, for example, is a lot of car for not much money. That really is great value. You can't really say the same of the 200 or the 300 series, but you can't blame Toyota. The car's pretty much in a class by itself, perhaps with just the Y62 as well, because it is a really big, bush-capable, tough wagon which you can rely on to get you in and out of outback situations, and it will be very well supported by the aftermarket. It's a Land Cruiser, and Toyota take the Land Cruiser name and its ethos and what it does very, very seriously. And, what other cars have that? Possibly, arguably, the Y62 Patrol. The Defender, it's gone a little bit Instagram. I don't really think you can put it in that class anymore. And then other cars like the Everest and the MUX, they're sized down. So it's kind of in a class of its own, to be honest.
So the Patrol Y62, that's quite an old model now, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a car ahead of its time because it's got this great, simple petrol engine, which isn't as thirsty as people would think. I mean, it's only thirsty because you can't resist giving it the beans, right? The Y62 people have this saying, go test drive one and tell us what colour you got, right? That's their thing. So, yeah, it's a great car, but I feel that now Australia is swinging round to petrol. I've been writing that diesel is dead for years, and I think that's finally starting to come true. Now, interestingly, Toyota actually dropped off all of their petrol vehicles, and Mitsubishi did the same. So the manual and the petrol are basically dead. It's turbo diesel automatic now or nothing. The exception to that is going to be the Ineos Grenadier, which is going to come here in petrol. And I don't think we'll see the petrol 300 here. Or maybe we could. It's interesting. It's actually got 2 air intakes for some bizarre reason. So if you want snorkels on it, you're going to have to look by like some dickhead redneck because you're going to have double snorkels on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The diesel's got a single air intake. The petrol's got 2. Why? I did ask the question, but no one knew the answer. So maybe 2 different design teams did 2 halves of the engine, just never met over the coffee cooler.
Yeah, interesting. So you've mentioned Ineos Grenadier, and you've ridden in one. You've seen one in the flesh?
I've seen one in the flesh yesterday, actually, and wasn't allowed to drive it because no one's allowed to drive it. I wasn't part of the official media launch because I'm not popular enough for that. Well, not with Ineos anyway. But I went over there as a private individual because I've actually paid a deposit on one, which is refundable, and I like the look of it so much I thought I will put my money down and get early in the queue for it. And as part of that, got an invitation to go see it. So go see it I did. And I got to sit in the passenger seat and got to crawl around it for a bit and talk to some of the local Ineos staff. So, and I've been following it for ages. I watched all the videos, so I've got some idea about it.
What are your thoughts? Because I think this is a pretty exciting vehicle.
I think it's a very exciting vehicle. And when I talked about the 300 series being in pretty much a class of its own, well, that's only until the Grenadier comes on board, and then the Grenadier will be in that class as well. And you could actually perhaps argue the Grenadier is in another class. So if we sort of have this continuum of, let's say, off-road bushableness, right? We start at the far left-hand side, and there you've got the Audi Q7 and the BMW X Series and a fleet of vehicles, that sort of thing. And then you sort of move to your Range Rovers and Discoveries and then to the Defender, and then you start moving a bit further towards the Y62 and then the 300 series. And to the right of those on this continuum actually is the Grenadier, because I think that the Grenadier is going to be even more bush-oriented and four-wheel drive friendly than the 300 series. And that is what is exciting about it, and that's why everyone should be very thankful to Mr. Jim, or was it Sir Jim? I can't remember. Anyway, Jim Ratcliffe, for actually doing this and bringing this vehicle to market, because it's exactly what we need, or at least the ethos behind it is exactly what we need. And I'm pretty sure that the vehicle itself will turn out to be exactly what we need to go do our work with four-wheel drives or to go bush adventuring.
Because this was brought on by the demise of the old Land Rover, wasn't it? The Defender.
Yes, it was, yeah. So the story is that Jim Ratcliffe was talking with his mates in the pub and they were bemoaning the lack of a decent four-wheel drive, etc. And this is something which we all do, right? But the difference between us and Jim Ratcliffe is that he owns Ineos Chemicals and he is a billionaire. His net worth is, 60 billion or something like that. So he can actually do something about it. So he just said, all right, well, we'll go build one then. And that's what it is. It's literally started Ineos Automotive from scratch, and they are building the Ineos Grenadier. So it's a clean sheet design from a clean sheet company. And then instantly people say, oh, yeah, but it's new, you shouldn't do it. Well, look, yes, everything's new at some point, right? And I'm inclined to give these guys the benefit of the doubt because they're doing all the right things. And they're partnering with people like Magnus Steyr, who, from Steyr Putch fame, who made the Hafling and the Pinzgau, and people, and Carraro, who are making the axles, and BMW making the engine, and then they're modifying that for it to be off-road friendly, etc. And then if you look at all the things they're saying, it's all the right things. The guy fronting the videos is Mark Evans, the vet, right? He did a really good series about rebuilding an old Range Rover. And it's like straight to the point. And one of the questions he asked in the video is like, why didn't you fit 16-inch wheels? I mean, come on, that's just great. That is the sort of question we want to hear. You contrast that with, Land Rover and the Defender, and you got their design boss, Joe McGovern, sitting there underneath some form of light display, talking about why a curve on the bodywork is the way it is, right? Who cares? Not me. I don't want to see curves on the body. I want to see a boxy body because I can put more stuff inside of it. And I don't need a story about the design inspiration from, some porpoise that he saw. I'm just making stuff up. I don't care. I want to see practicality. When I put stuff inside of it, I want it to be a big, heavy payload in it, and I want it to be bush robust. And everything I've seen coming out of Ineos is that way. That seems to be what they're oriented on and what they're focused on. It's just little things like every other car manufacturer has a plastic cover for the engine, and they had a problem with pedestrian compliance. So it's got to be a certain distance between the engine and the bonnet. So if a pedestrian lands on it, the pedestrian's got a soft landing. That's pretty standard, right? So they go, okay, well, why do we need an engine cover? Well, we don't. So throw the engine cover away. And in that way, the engine can be mounted pretty high, and therefore it still meets the bonnet sort of compliance, stuff like that. And then you look at the headlights. They're not fancy wraparound futuristic headlights. They're just really simple circular headlights because that's simple and practical, stuff like that, right? You want these vehicles designed by blokes with set squares as opposed to designers with fancy pens, right? And so they got Mark Evans to front it, whereas not Victoria Beckham, who did the Evoque, for example. So it's sending up all the right vibes to me, so I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt.
Well, having off-the-shelf products like a BMW engine, that makes it a lot less risky.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it does make it less risky. And also because they're going for a relatively simple vehicle, I'm sure they've got an NVH, noise, vibration, harshness engineer there, but I don't think he's going to be working as hard as his equivalent in Land Rover, for example, which is okay by me because take that development money and put it into robustness and maximising capability, etc. They say it's going to be the most capable off-roader. To be honest, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It doesn't really matter. It's going to be more than off-road capable enough. You see, there comes a point with touring four-wheel drives when enough capability is enough and you kind of don't need any more. Otherwise, we'd all be running around with 38-inch tyres in 6x6s. It's like there's only so much you need. Once you get beyond a certain point, you've got to put your money into sort of robustness, and that's really what I want to see with the vehicle, graceful degradation, stuff like that.
And so I think the thing that really makes it quite exciting, because the rumours that were going around was it was going to be quite pricey, but they're talking about $84,500 for the base model plus on-road costs.
Yeah, and look, that's not cheap, but it's not out of the question either. But with four-wheel drives, I work on track-ready pricing. And what I mean by that is, what's it going to cost you to get that vehicle to the start of a track where you're going to slot that lever into low range. Now, a classic example for that is the Ford Ranger Raptor. You look, oh, that's expensive. Then you think, hang on, it's already got the suspension, it's already got the tyres, it's already got the recovery point, it's already got a metal bar, it's already got a tow bar, it's already got a whole bunch of things, right? Oh, it's even got decent side steps, which you know, not quite rock sliders, but they're pretty close. So you go, actually, you know what? It's an expensive car, the Raptor, but it's actually got about 15 grand's worth of stuff I'd have to buy anyway. So if I'm going to compare it to a Ranger, then I kind of need to make an allowance for that. And the Grenadier is going to be the same sort of thing. So it's going to come with 17-inch wheels, and it's going to come with decent tyres if you take I hope they're light truck construction. And it's going to come with a bunch of things just done. And the snorkel, it's amazing. They're calling the snorkel a raised air intake, despite the fact it's going to be fully sealed. Yet Toyota called their raised air intake, which isn't fully sealed, a snorkel. I'm just going, guys, sort it out. You know, it's just ridiculous. But anyway, so it comes with a bunch of stuff which hopefully be standard. So you've got to look at your sort of track-ready pricing there as opposed to just the sticker price.
What was it like to ride in?
Look, you can't really draw that many conclusions from just a brief ride. It was comfortable enough, but which was actually a bit suspicious because I don't like cars being tuned for, well, four-wheel drives anyway, being tuned for low or unladen ride, because when you get a four-wheel drive, it never rides around of that nature. It never rides around at unladen weight, right? Because you've got a roof rack on there, you've got a winch, I don't know if you've ever weighed all of the knickknacks you put in your car, but, you know, your recovery gear, your Leatherman, your tyre pressure gauge, all of these things which weigh nothing actually put together weigh something. Mine came to about 50 kilos, including my basic recovery gear, right? It's a lot of weight in it. So all of these vehicles are going to be running around, I would suggest, minimum 150, maybe 300 kilograms extra weight before anything else. And so that's what you want to tune the suspension for, preferably tune it to GVM. If it's a bouncy ride unladen, well, so be it. You know, it's a working vehicle. Tune it for GM, don't tune it for unload. So I felt that the suspension was perhaps a little bit soft, given that it was fine for unladen. But again, as a passenger ride, the terrain was extremely easy. It was only brief, so it's hard to say things there. The engine seemed to pull okay, but, you know, it's going to be in the order of 180 kilowatts for an 8-speed gearbox, so you'd kind of expect that. The over-bonnet visibility is really good, which is rare for a modern vehicle. Ever sat in a Defender, it's like very much like that. Couldn't really see the turning circle or anything else like that, but you expect that to be okay as well. The transfer case is Defender-esque again, so it's got high range, low range as you'd expect. Centre diff can be locked and unlocked in either high or low range, so you can back trailers or manoeuvre at slow speeds in low range centre diff unlocked, which I really like, actually. That's great.
And we're expecting them towards the end of next year.
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. They haven't even started production, so we'll be getting them quite early, because I think they're planning on mid-2022 production for it. Yeah,
look, could be. We'll just have to see. There could be further delay due to COVID. Look, I mean, I would say that if you're looking at a vehicle at that sort of time frame and you're listening to this podcast, you would be mad not to seriously consider it.
It looks great, and I think that the big issue that we've had is that there's not many people who've been building four-wheel drives for people who go four-wheel driving, and this looks the real deal.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It is absolutely the real deal. I honestly didn't think another vehicle of this nature would ever be built again. But, you know, thanks to Jim and his conversation in the pub, here we go. You know, it must be great to have a billionaire who I'll just go and build a vehicle. It's just great. I'd love to have that kind of power. But, yeah, the interesting thing is that we've got to talk about why you wouldn't want a Grenadier. Because we're going, yeah, it's great. It is what it is. But the reason you wouldn't want one is for the same reason that you do want one. And that is, it's to the right of my continuum from BMW and Audi on the left all the way to Ineos Grenadier on the right. So if you want a lot of, let's say, active safety...
Don't we all want to be there, though? Isn't that where we want to be?
No, not everybody does. And not everyone's important people in their life necessarily want to be there either. So, for example, if you want things like a power lift-up tailgate or a lot of active safety or a lot of luxury features, then I don't think you're going to find that in the Grenadier, and you shouldn't, right? But if those things are important to you, then you might need to take a look at the 300 series or a Defender or something like that.
Well, I think certainly there'll be more details that come out as we get closer to launch, and I'm really keen to see them out on the tracks and see exactly what they look like, because I think it looks awesome. And depending on what the specs look like, because they're still sort of refining those specs, aren't they?
Oh, very much so. So the vehicle in the straight at the moment is an early prototype, so we can't read that much into it. So it doesn't have any electronics, no ABS, no brake traction control, nothing. The parts are pre-production, sort of probably 3D printed, that sort of stuff, or handmade. And there's a lot of things which are unknown, which will change. The tear mass hasn't been defined, for example. I'm guessing it's going to be 2600, because you've got two live axles and a separate chassis. Just looking at the weight of the vehicle, I'm not really seeing how they're going to get it down to the 2200 mark there. The payload should still be 850, 900, I'm hoping. So that would be great if it was. So it's early days yet, but we can get a bit of a look at it. I feel that the trailing arms on the rear axle are just too low. Looks like it's going, that's too low. That needs to be fixed. I would like a bit more clearance there.
Just having a look at it, there's a couple of photos which we'll put up on the website. It does look quite low. Yeah,
it does. The tyres I'd have liked to see them 33 inches. That's what the Raptor's got. The Defender had 235, 85, 16. I'd have liked to see those tyres on it as well. The tyres are 265, 70, 17, so that's 27 millimetres greater rolling diameter than the Ranger. So every millimetre helps, right? But I would have liked to have seen 33s on that at least, because it is an off-road oriented vehicle there. That's a bit disappointing. But I'm sure people will put it on there, but it would just be nice to come from the factory with that sort of diameter tyre.
Absolutely. Alrighty, well, thank you for all of that information. It's definitely the one that I'm going to be waiting to see, and hopefully take one out for a spin on the tracks.
Yeah, me too, and I'll keep you posted as I learn more.
Excellent. Thanks, Robert. So, really great to hear more about the Ineos Grenadier. I'm really glad to see it come in at a price that's quite a bit more affordable than what the early rumours were coming out. And the LandCruiser, the 300, it looks pretty spiffy. And I'm sure we're going to see lots of them on the tracks. Once again, if you got anything out of the podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast. It really does help us to get the word out there. And I think it's really important that we start working together to get more people out of the house and onto the tracks so that there's more of us out there enjoying this amazing country. That's it. Hopefully I'll see you out there one day. Bye.
4x4earth.com is used by over 200,000 people every month to find great tracks, organise trips, and find out how to better enjoy exploring the great outdoors. There's over 1,000 tracks and 300 campsites ready for you to explore. So check out 4x4earth.com today and sign up to get access to the track information, ask questions, and meet other 4x4 Earthers. Membership is completely free. If you're looking for a good route, check out 4x4earth.com today.